Truth is not taught, truth is heard. You do not arrive at what you actually believe through logic, even though we tell ourselves we are rational beings. You receive it. You receive truth as an inner voice that feels quite authoritative. And only later do you get to call it my opinion. Before you argue with yourself, before you justify, before you even build a narrative of what you are and who you are, something in you already knows what is right, what is wrong, what is allowed, what is dangerous, what is possible, and what is impossible. It doesn't come as a conclusion drawn rationally from facts. It comes as a tone. It comes as a pressure, as a certainty, and a command that feels within you as this is how it is. And most people never question where that voice actually comes from. They just identify with it. Life has no inherent meaning. If meaning is not assigned by you, it will be assigned by the system. Welcome to Meta Monday. Hello, my name is Daria Stan. I am the creator of Alchemy by Design, and this is Meta Monday. Meta Monday is a podcast that is supposed to open up your cognition and help you understand how your mind actually works, how your mind actually functions, and how you can step into the role of the observer instead of being controlled by it. And this is where we will discuss metacognition, bicameral mind, the identity of the self, how the self is formed, ego, masks, layers, perception, and everything that comes with it. So if you're interested in this type of content, stick around and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much for being here. In today's episode, we will be discussing about the bicameral mind, or more precisely, about the two functions of the human mind. There's one part of you that acts, that makes decisions, that functions, that moves, and there's another part of you that narrates what happened. This is where the bicameral mind becomes relevant. Now, Julian Jaynes discovered the bicameral mind, and his core claim was radical but simple. There was a time when our inner voice was not experienced as me. It was experienced as someone talking, not metaphorically, neurologically. Decisions in the ancient world did not come from introspection. They did not come from rationality. There was no I should, I could, I wonder, I must. There was an instruction. The right hemisphere generated a command, and the left hemisphere executed. And the subjective experience was God spoken. When Achilles stops in battle, he did not decide to stop in battle. He didn't rationalize it. Athena tells him to stop. When a king acted, it wasn't because he weighted options. It was because God spoke. When a tribe moved places, it wasn't because of debate. It because the ancestor command. What we now read as mythology, Jaynes' view was that it was an actual record of how the human mind used to function. And this is the important part. The voice was always inside, but it wasn't experienced as the self. It was a distinction between the self and the authority that was not located in the same center as the self. Authority was in the voice. Now, when that structure began to break down through social complexity, cities growing, language, metaphor, writing, decentralized that, the collapse the of central divine authority. This voice, this function of the mind did not change. It changed its location. It wasn't no longer God, but it was still there. And when a system loses its center of authority, it fragments. One commanding voice became many partially commanded voice. From God said, we got desire says, fear says, guilt says, my mother says, my father says, my community says, survival says, morality says, the church says, my trauma says. These are not concepts, these are felt imperatives, felt commands that go through your body. And this is the birth of the unconscious. So God did not disappear, it went underground, not as a storage room of memories, but as an autonomous command structure. Now, here is where Carl Jung was very precise about this. Complexes that we have, they behave like little personas. They have memories, they have emotions, they have intentions, they have a worldview, and they can take over. Which means that the old gods did not die. They kind of fragmented and they went underground. They went into our subconscious. They stopped speaking as personified figures, Zeus, Yahweh, the ancestors, and they started speaking in absolutes. This is dangerous. This is forbidden. This is irresistible. And most importantly, this is who I am. And this is how things must be done. Because there is no longer an obvious externalization of what we call the voice of me. Now, this is how the modern mind is fragmented. It's sort of polyphonic. We hear multiple voices, we hear multiple fragments, and people are kind of driven by whichever voice is the loudest. And they're mistaking possession of a certain archetype with themselves, with identity. This is why you can sincerely say something today and sincerely say something completely opposite tomorrow. It's not that you changed, it's that the inner authority that had the microphone changed. In the past, when the mind was projected outside and ruled by one God, one voice, one authoritative command, now the modern mind is ruled by rotating archetypes. And what we call ego is no longer a center, it's more like a secretary. And now, what Carl Jung tried to do was not to pull out these forces, but to call them archetypes as structural patterns of our psyche. These archetypes are older than the personal self, and they have their own logic and their own worldview. They live through us. And if we don't live them consciously, like he said, until you make your unconscious conscious, it will run your life and you're going to call it fate. That sentence is not just poetic, it's structural. It's exactly how your neurosystem works. It means that if you can't feel the difference between a voice rising in you and the center, which is you, you are functionally unable to choose. Not between decisions, not being rational, not between complexes. This is where sovereignty becomes an issue, not as a philosophy, but as a nervous system need for reality. Sovereignty does not mean hearing no voices, taking no commands. Sovereignty means giving yourself the space to know which voice is speaking and that it is not a command. Right now, as you're listening to me, you can notice something. There is the part that I'm saying, the content, and there is your reaction to it. Your agreement, your disagreement, your resistance, your curiosity, your boredom, your recognition. And then there's a third place that notices all of it, That place is not excited. That place is not threatened. That place is not trying to convince you. It's not trying to run away. It simply notices that you are in a certain way. That is the axis. In ancient culture, that axis was necessary. They all saw it. In Jungian language, that is the self. In nervous system language, it is the point of coherence, around which all the states of self can organize. The tragedy is that modern humans did not just lose God, we lost that axis. We lost the self that decides which of these gods, these voices, these archetypes are to be obeyed. And we never reclaimed that axis. So that seat of the self stayed emptied. And the archetypes rush to take that seat. Trauma takes it, sexual drive takes it, morality takes it, collective ideology takes it, romantic projection takes it, fear takes it, and each of them says, I am the truth. And because the nervous system doesn't have that command structure, it simply obeys whatever the voice says. So, working with the unconscious, it's not about making these voices sort of disappear. It's about relocating your inner authority and shifting from the voice that speaks, therefore I move, to I hear that, therefore I decide. This is what Jung meant when he said making the unconscious conscious. This is what it actually means. There's no analysis, there's not an endless stories, there's not spiritually bypassing and claiming that we hear other people. It means creating the command center, creating the self that moves through archetypes and can hear them. We do not kill the archetype, we just move them as counselors instead of on the throne. We let them speak, but we don't let them rule. And you can feel this somatically when it happens. When an archetype is in charge, the body tightens, the time collapses, and alternative disappears because you can only hear that voice. It feels urgent, it feels absolute, it feels non negotiable. But when yourself is in charge, there's space, there's time, there's choice, there's optionality. Not because the impulse is weaker, but because it's no longer identical with the self. The voice is no longer the I. That's the evolutionary step with the bicameral mind. Not to silence the voice and not to fall back into obedience, but to claim the self, to claim the guides instead of being possessed by them, to hear their truth without mistaking that voice as myself. To know that, yes, you have an inner authority, but it's not the one who speaks, it's the one who listens and the one who chooses what to believe from what your mind is telling you. This is where the story of fragmentation of the psyche becomes very concrete. Because when every single commanding voice is integrated, what emerges is a free, unified individual. What emerges is a psyche that is made out of layers of internalized authorities: the mother, the father, the community, your culture, God, law, even your trauma, your survival patterns. All of them become voices that can guide you. Before, all of them were issuing orders, and none of them were clearly identified as not me. So the important step is to identify them as not me, integrate them as parts of the self, parts of the memory, so that your internal self is no longer colonized. Because what we used to call as one God outside became many voices inside. and each of them had a different logic: survival, love, danger, belonging. And that's the inner conflict you feel. It's a natural result of a fragmented nervous system pretending to be oneself. One part of you says go, another part of you says stop, another part of you says speak, another part of you says hide, another part of you says desire, and another part of you says, but not like that. And another part of you says control this. It's not because you're not organized, it's because the self, the axis around all of this should organize, is fragmented. This fragmentation that Jaynes points to, it's on a neurological level. And Jung comes in to provide us with a symbolic and psychological level. Jung never said you have a shadow because you're broken. He said that the psyche is structured in autonomous systems, whether you choose to call them complexes, essences, archetypes. It's part of you that when it's unintegrated, it becomes a ruler. It's not just a memory, it's a command center that it's built around the self. An archetype is not just a symbol, it's a complete intelligence. And it can take possession of your perception of yourself, of your behavior. To give you a specific example, when the mother archetype is activated, you don't think I will act motherly. You are moved by a pattern that's older than any personal story you might have. Also, when the warrior activated, your body, your values, your timing, even your sense of threat completely reorganize and respond as the warrior, respond as the fighter. When the judge is activated, everything within you is weighted, measured, and condemned. These are not metaphors, these are not cards in the tarot deck. They are functional states of your nervous system, each with their own authoritative signatures. And this is why making the unconscious conscious was never about insight. You can fully understand your patterns intellectually, you can intellectualize to the end of it, and you'll still be ruled by them. Consciousness, in the sense that Jung meant it, it's the relocation of your center from these archetypes to the self. It's the difference between I'm angry and I feel anger. Those two sentences sound very similar, but they're not the same. There's a power shift in them. In the first one, you identify with the anger, and anger becomes the subject. In the second one, you are the subject, you are in charge, and the archetype just roams around you. It stands before you, you can see it, you can witness it. That is sovereignty in practice. Not shutting the voice that's angry, not arguing with it, not trying to demonize it, not trying to suppress it, but removing its authority back to yourself. That's how you claim your own inner authority. Now, let's bring this into the body a bit. Bring to mind a recent situation where you felt strong, unquestionable. It could be an attraction when you felt it, it could be something like a moral certainty, or it could be the urge to do something, or the urge to attack an opinion. And just notice how that impulse presented itself. Did it feel like this is an option? Or did it feel like this is reality, point blank? That difference tells you whether you are in your center, where everything is an option, or you are inside a complex, inside an archetype. Complexes don't say, hey, here's my opinion, what do you think about it? They say, this is how things are. They speak in absolutes. They compress time. They erase all other alternatives. This is exactly how the ancient God voice spoke: go, stop, kill, wait. The form changed, it became internalized, but the function never changed. It's still present. It's the same way we channel, it's the same way we call intuition now. So it's not an end of inner command. That part of that inner commands you still exists. All that change is that it's no longer a single inner command. It was replaced by multiplicity. It was replaced by fragmentation, by partial gods, each telling their own story, each issuing their own orders, each claiming their own part of truth. And our task is not to silence them. Our task is to integrate them as advisors, as a center around the self, without allowing any of them to rule. This is why Jung always insisted that the self is not an archetype around the others. It's the organizing principle. It's the axis around which all these archetypes rotate. And when the self is not embodied, the archetypes possess us. When the self is embodied, the archetypes inform us. That's the difference. That's the main difference. When the archetypes are in charge, what it feels like I have no choice. And integration feels like I feel this and I take time to choose my response. And you can train this capacity, and not through philosophy, but through actually observing yourself. Right now, as you listen to me, notice which part of you is saying, yes, it's true, no, it's wrong, or this is dangerous, or this excites me. Each of these voices are archetypes in you. Instead of following one of them, stop for a second or so and internally say to yourself, I hear you. Not to silence those voices, not to fight them, but to recognize it as a voice, to see the difference between the voice and the center. That's the smallest shift that you can do in order to return to the axis of the self. And this is the movement from being commanded to being advised by the many fragments, from becoming the one who can hear them all without surrendering your axis of decision making. And this is not spiritual, it's actually neurological. It's the maturation of the human nervous system from obedience to authorship. And this is what makes responsibility even possible. Because when we are listening to the archetypes and we say, I had no choice, there's no sovereignty in there, there's no individuality in there. Sovereignty begins the moment where we can say, I feel this, I recognize this, and still I choose consciously. Not because the voice disappeared, but because I no longer identify it as myself. If you enjoyed this content, if you are interested in how your mind actually works, if you are interested in how the self forms, if you are interested in what's the difference between the self, the ego, and the unconscious, stick around. This is Meta Monday, and we're going to go much deeper than this. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of Meta Monday. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe.